The rain had been falling since 2 in the afternoon, a slow, thin Ohio rain that did not so much fall as gather on the eaves and let go a little at a time. Hattie May Cromer stood on the porch of the house at 218 Adams Street in Akron. In front of the door her father had closed 9 minutes before. She was 18 years old. Her left hand held a canvas valise. Her right hand was in the pocket of a wool coat, one size too large for her. The porch light had not been turned on. Inside, behind the curtain in the front window, her stepmother stood watching. The curtain was a yellow polyester that had been there since Hattie was small. When she was 9, her mother had pulled it down to wash it, and the rod had come down with it, and her mother had laughed about that for the rest of that winter. Her mother had been dead 9 years. Her father had not come back to the window. A Buick the color of wet concrete drove past on Adams Street without slowing. Hattie counted in threes under her breath, the way old Silas had taught her when she was small. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The rain ran down inside the collar of her coat. In the inside pocket of the coat were $28 and a folded square of paper. On the paper, in pencil, was an address she had never been to, Decatur Road, Mingo, Ohio. The handwriting was hers, but the address was not. She had copied it from a letter 3 years ago and forgotten she had it until tonight. She picked up the valise. She walked. The Greyhound station in Akron at 9:40 smelled of diesel and stale coffee, and the cold breath of a Friday night in October. Hattie bought a one-way ticket to East Liverpool for $13.90. She did not have to change buses. The man behind the counter did not look up when he gave her the change. She sat on a bench near the heater and watched the second hand on the wall clock. At 10:04, a man with a paper bag of clothes asked her if she had a light. She said no. He moved off, not unkind, only tired. The bus left at 10:20. She took a seat halfway back, against the window, and pressed her cheek to the glass. The cold of it surprised her every time, even though she had pressed her cheek to bus glass many times in her short life. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist that caught the sodium lights and broke them into orange halos. She kept her hand on the pocket where the address was. 40 minutes south of Akron, the driver looked at her in the long rectangular mirror above the windshield. He was a heavy man with a gray mustache and a wedding ring worn so thin it could have been a wire. After a while he said, his eyes still on the road, "Somebody picking you up in East Liverpool, honey?" "Yes, sir," Hattie said. He nodded once. He did not ask anything else. Some kindness, she thought, was the kindness of not asking. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she was inside something that looked like sleep. A memory came up out of it. She was 15, and her mother had been dead 6 years, and her father had driven her down to Mingo for a Saturday because Silas had asked. Silas was her mother's father. She had not seen him often. He was a quiet man with hands that looked too large for the rest of him, knuckles enlarged from a kind of work she did not yet know the name for. He had walked her out behind the small wooden house on Decatur Road to a shed she had not noticed from the front yard. He had not let her in. He had stood by the door of the shed and looked at her for a long time. Then he had reached up into the branches of a small apple tree and brought down a single apple. He had put it in her hand. The apple was cold. It was September. When the time comes, Silas had said, "You'll know how to find this place." She had not understood him then. She had been a sullen child of 15 who already half believed her stepmother that the old man was simple. She had eaten the apple on the drive home and dropped the core out the window. She had not thought of that Saturday again until tonight. The bus rocked. She opened her eyes. The rain had stopped. East Liverpool to Mingo was 9 miles by the county road and $3 in a taxi she could not afford, so Hattie walked. She walked with the valise in her left hand and the coat collar turned up around her ears. The road went past a closed muffler shop and a feed store with the lights out and a Methodist church with a sign that said "Prayer Works" and "This week we need it." The grass on the shoulder was wet up to her ankles. Decatur Road came after the second bridge. It was a county road of the kind that has no shoulder and no center line. Only a strip of asphalt the width of a single car, laid down 40 years ago and patched every spring since. She walked half a mile on it before she came to the mailbox. The mailbox was rusted along the seam. The post leaned. The letters had been painted on by hand and the paint had gone brown at the edges, but the name was still legible. S. Cromer. Behind the mailbox, the house. It was a wood frame one-story with a low roof and a porch the width of the front. A pickup that had not moved in years sat in the side yard, its tires flat against the gravel. Behind the house, half hidden by a stand of yellow ash, the roof of a smaller building. She stopped at the foot of the porch steps. She had a key. She had not thought of the key in 3 years, but she remembered it the way you remember a number you wrote down once. It had come in a manila envelope from a lawyer named Ezra Whitcomb in October of the year Silas died. Her father had taken the envelope from the kitchen table and put it on top of the refrigerator. Hattie had taken it down a week later and opened it. Inside was a key with a paper tag tied to it that read Decatur RD. She had put the key inside the front cover of the Webster's Pocket Dictionary that had belonged to her mother. She had never opened that dictionary in the 3 years since. She set the valise down on the porch. She took the dictionary out of the inside pocket of her coat. She turned it sideways and shook it once. The key fell out and landed flat against the porch boards. She bent down, she picked it up. The door did not open clean. The door was warped along the bottom and had to be lifted with the shoulder and pushed at the same time. Hattie remembered from the one Saturday when she was 15 that Silas had done it that way without thinking. She did it now without thinking either. Inside, the front room smelled of wood dust and linseed oil, and the faint, cold mineral smell that houses get when they have been empty without being abandoned. The light through the window was thin. A braided rag rug lay in the middle of the floor. A reading lamp with a green glass shade stood beside an armchair, its cord run along the baseboard. The kitchen table was set for two. 2 plates, 2 glasses, a stoneware pitcher in the middle. The plates were dusty, but they had been laid by a hand that had taken some care with the matter. Forks on the left, knives on the right, as if Silas 3 years ago had sat down for a meal and then stood up before eating it. From under the armchair, something moved. A black and white cat came out slow, paused, looked at her, and walked over and pressed against her shin without ceremony. The cat had a frayed left ear and a body that had begun to settle into the looseness of an old animal. It did not look hungry. Someone had been feeding it. Hattie did not lean down. She had lifted her eyes to the wall above the armchair. There, in 3 plain wooden frames, were 3 photographs. A girl of 7 leaning on a fence. A girl of 12 with a missing front tooth. A girl of 16 in a high school sweater Hattie remembered owning. She did not remember the photographs being taken. She slept on the sofa with her coat over her. She did not remember choosing to sleep. She remembered standing in front of the photographs for a long time. She remembered the cat returning to the armchair and curling on its cushion. After that, she remembered nothing until the gray light of the next morning was in the window. The cat was asleep on the arm of the sofa above her head. She sat up slow. Her neck was stiff. The valise stood by the door where she had set it, and her coat had slid down to her knees while she slept. The house was quiet in a way she had never heard a house be quiet. There was no furnace running. There was no neighbor truck starting. There was only the small intermittent sound of a wall clock somewhere in the back of the house ticking through a second hand that had developed a hitch. She walked through the front room into the kitchen, past the table set for 2, and looked at it again in the morning light. It was not strange. It was deliberate. A man who set a table for 2 before he died was a man who expected to come back to it, or a man who expected someone else to. She opened the ice box. It was clean and empty and unplugged. The cord was coiled on top. She went back through the front room and down a short hall and looked into the only bedroom. The bed was made. The quilt was a 9-patch in faded blues and browns, and it was tucked under the mattress with the kind of corner that only certain men learn in the army and never lose. There was a Bible on the nightstand and a folded white handkerchief on top of the Bible. On the wall opposite the foot of the bed, 3 more photographs. A girl of 2 on a porch she did not recognize. A girl of 9 in a Sunday dress. A girl of 14 holding a dog she had never owned. She closed the door of the bedroom. She did not know yet that she would not open it again for 2 weeks. She went back to the kitchen. She pulled the back door open on the second try. The yard behind the house was narrow, and the grass was high and yellow from going unmowed 2 summers. A flagstone path led across it, half sunk and slick with the night's wet. The path went around an apple tree she had no memory of, although she had been here that one Saturday at 15, and the apple Silas had given her had come from this tree. She did not look closely at the trunk of the tree yet. The path ended at the door of the workshop. The workshop was a wood frame building no bigger than a single-car garage. The tin roof had gone to rust around the seams. A single window was set high on the side. The lower half boarded over from the inside with a piece of plywood. The door was painted a brown so old it had silvered. There was a steel hasp and 2 padlocks. The padlocks looked oiled. She tried the first key. It did not fit either lock. She went back to the house and looked. On the kitchen counter, half hidden by a tin coffee canister, was a small enameled tin box she had not noticed in the dark the night before. The lid of the box was painted with a thin gold border. On the lid, in pencil that had been gone over twice in his hand, "For Hattie." Inside, 2 keys on a thin wire ring and a folded square of paper. The paper had a single line written on it. "If you are reading this, the first lock is mine. The second lock is yours." She put the keys in her palm and closed her hand and stood for a moment in the cold, morning kitchen of a house that had been waiting for her 3 years. She did not cry. She had not cried since the night her father had told her she had 30 minutes to be off the porch. She felt instead a kind of small numbness that was not unfamiliar. She had felt it the day they buried her mother. She had felt it the day they brought the stepmother home. She put the keys in her coat pocket. She walked back across the yard. She did not get to the workshop door. A voice came from the chain-link fence at the side of the yard, where the neighbor's lot began. The voice was old, low, and steady, with the slow shape of a vowel that did not belong to Ohio but had been worn down by 60 years in it. "Hattie," Hattie turned. The woman at the fence was small, not 5 feet 4, with a navy wool sweater buttoned to the throat and gray hair pulled back into a knot at the nape of her neck. She held a covered dish in both hands. Her face was the face of a woman who had been pretty when young and was now something better than pretty. "I am Adele Krasinski," the woman said. "I live there. I knew your grandfather." Hattie did not move from the path. "He told me you would come in October," Adele said. "He said October because that is when the leaves down here turn first. 3 years he has been gone, and every October I have looked. This morning I saw the porch light through my kitchen window at 6. I made you something." Hattie looked at the dish. "It is zupa ogórkowa," Adele said. "Pickle soup. My husband was a pattern maker also. Polish men eat this when they cannot think of what else to do." Hattie did not know what to say. She had not been spoken to like this in a long time. She walked across the wet yard to the fence and took the dish through the chain link with both hands. The dish was warm. The lid was a saucer turned upside down. "Thank you, ma'am," Hattie said. "Adele," Adele said. Adele looked at her a long moment. "You have your mother's mouth," she said, "not the rest of the mouth." Hattie did not answer this. "I have not been inside the workshop in 3 years," Adele said. "I kept the second key for him after he could not lift the box anymore. He said when you came, I should give it to you. He did not say when, only that I would know. I should give it to you now." She reached into the pocket of her sweater and took out a key with a length of brown twine tied through the hole. She handed it across the fence. The twine was frayed at one end where Silas had bitten it off, 3 summers and 1 autumn ago, because his hands had gotten too stiff for scissors that day. Hattie took the key. "Eat the soup before it gets cold," Adele said. "Then go in. He has been waiting." Hattie ate the soup at the kitchen table, not at one of the 2 set places but on the corner where there was no setting. The soup was hot and sour and thickened with cream and barley, and it surprised her by being the first warm thing she had eaten in 2 days. The cat watched her from the rug. She gave it a piece of barley on her finger. It took it. When the bowl was empty, she rinsed it and set it on the drain board and went back across the yard with both keys in her hand. The first lock came open clean. The second lock stuck. She worked the key gently. She remembered again without meaning to that Silas had worked locks gently. He had told her once, when she was 9, that a lock is a small animal you do not need to frighten. The second lock turned. She pulled the hasp. She pushed the door. The workshop smelled of cedar dust and linseed and a cold metal smell that was not unpleasant. The window over the workbench let in a band of pale light. The floor was poured concrete that had been swept. The workbench ran along the wall under the window, and the wall opposite the bench, 12 feet long and 7 feet high, was hung from end to end with hand tools laid out in a careful and even hand. Hattie stood in the doorway for a full minute without moving. She had seen in her life the tool walls of 2 of her father's brothers and the unfinished basement of a man who had courted her stepmother briefly. She had never seen one like this. The tools were not new and not pristine. They had been used. The wear was visible on the handles and the brass. They were laid out the way a man lays out the things he has known with his hands all his life, so he can find them in the dark. Each tool had a small piece of yellow masking tape under it. On each piece of tape was a word, written by hand. She did not yet know what most of the words meant. Adele came in behind her, in stocking feet, having left her shoes at the door of her own house, and crossed the yard in them. She stood next to Hattie at the threshold and looked at the wall. "He sharpened these every spring," Adele said. "He sharpened them like other men go to confession." She walked to the wall. She reached up and took down a wooden plane the length of her forearm. Dark with handling, the brass adjuster polished bright by a thumb. "This is a jack plane," Adele said, "number 5. It is the plane a man uses when he does not yet know what he wants. Look." She turned it over in her palm and held the blade flat across her thumb. "You knock the back of the blade against the bench. Like so. You hear the ring. A blade that is straight, it rings clean. A blade that is bent, it thuds. This one rings." She held the plane closer. "You put your thumb along the edge, not across. Along, you feel for the nick. A nick you feel before you see. This one has none." She tipped the plane against the light from the window. "You hold the cutting edge to the light. If light comes through, the blade is gone. If light does not come through, the blade is still a friend. See." She turned the blade against the window. No light came through. She put the plane back on its hooks. "He kept them all this way," Adele said. 3 years he has been gone, and they are still ready. Someone should use them again." He would say someone. She did not look at Hattie when she said this. Hattie walked the length of the wall slowly, reading the words on the masking tape. Tri-square, marking gauge, dovetail saw, block plane. The words were the words of a vocabulary she did not have. At the end of the bench, half buried under a small drift of fine cedar sawdust, was a folding rule of yellow wood with brass hinges. It was 24 inches long, folded into 4 sections of 6. Hattie picked it up. She brushed the sawdust off. The hinges were stiff. She worked them open. On the inside face of the rule, scratched not stamped, in letters small but plain, were 3 initials. She did not move. Adele had come up beside her without making a sound. "He carved out that," Adele said, "the week your mother brought you home from the hospital. He said a man should measure with something that belongs to who he loves. He was going to give it to you when you turned 8. Then he was going to give it to you when you turned 12. Then he—" She did not finish the sentence. She put her hand on Hattie's shoulder. Then she took it away again. Hattie held the rule against her chest with both hands. She did not ask Adele to finish the sentence. She did not know yet that it was the first of several sentences in this house that would be left unfinished by everyone who loved her. On purpose. She knew only that the wood of the rule was warm, where her hands had been on it for half a minute. She knew the initials had been cut by a knife held by a man she had hardly known. He had counted on her coming to a workshop on a road she had never been told the name of. "Why this workshop?" Hattie said. "Why not the house?" Adele looked at her a long moment. "Some things," Adele said, "he wanted you to find on your own." She turned and walked back across the yard in her stockings. The first week, Hattie did not sleep in the bedroom. She slept on the sofa, with the cat at her head, and ate from a single pot Adele lent her. She kept the workshop key on a length of the same brown twine and wore it under her shirt. Mornings she swept the concrete floor. Afternoons she sat on the workbench stool and read the words on the masking tape and tried to match them to the tools they sat under. By the 3rd day she knew tri-square from miter square. By the 5th day she knew the difference between a jack plane and a smoothing plane and could tell which was which by the sound of the iron when you set the plane down. By the 6th day she could read the shrinkage scales on 3 of the 4 boxwood rules, Silas in a small drawer under the bench. She did not yet understand what the scales were for. She did not call her father. She did not call anybody. On the morning of the 7th day, Adele came across the yard with a thermos of coffee and a man behind her. The man was 76 and walked with the small, stiff care of a body that has been kind to a trade for 50 years and is now being repaid in joints. He wore a flannel shirt and pressed work pants and a billed cap that said Mahoning Valley Foundry in faded gold. "This is Vincent Hudak," Adele said. "He was your grandfather's friend 41 years. I called him. I should have called him 3 days ago." Vince did not put out his hand right away. He looked at the open door of the workshop and at the apple tree and at Hattie, and then he put out his hand. The hand was the hand of a man who had held metal cold and metal hot for a long time. It engulfed hers entirely. "You're Lila's girl," he said. "Yes, sir," Hattie said. "He had pictures of you in his wallet," Vince said. "Every age. He never showed them. I saw them once when he was paying for breakfast and the wallet fell open. He shut it fast. He cleared his throat. He looked at the apple tree. Lila brought you home in March of '78, he said. I came over that night. He was making a rule. He was making it small because you were small. Vince walked past Hattie and into the workshop. He stood in the middle of the floor and turned a slow half-circle looking at the wall. He did not touch anything. Mahoning Valley used to have 18 men who could do this work, he said. Now there are 6 of us, 5 after the spring. Silas was the best of us. He would not have said so. He turned around to Hattie. You want to learn this, he said. It was not a question. Hattie did not know yet whether she wanted to. I don't know, she said. Vince nodded once. He liked the answer. He went over to a hook by the door and took down a work shirt of blue chambray that had been hanging there 3 years. He held it out. Try it, he said. If it fits you, it will tell you something. The shirt fit her. Vince stayed an hour. He drank Adele's coffee from the thermos cap, and he showed Hattie what a shrink rule was for. Cast iron shrinks, he said. He took down the rule from the drawer under the bench, the one with the brass hinges and the cleanest scale. When you pour metal into a pattern and it cools, it does not stay the size you poured. It pulls in. Cast iron 1/8 of an inch on every foot. Brass more. Aluminum. More still. He laid the rule flat on the bench. So a pattern maker, he said, does not measure in the size of the thing he wants. He measures in the size before the thing pulls in. This rule looks like a normal rule, but every inch on it is a little longer than an inch, by 1/8 in a foot. So when the metal pulls in, the part comes out the size the engineer drew. He took the folding rule with the initials HMC and laid it next to the bench rule. This one too, he said. He made this one shrink, so it would measure things that would get smaller. He looked at Hattie a long moment. He measured you, Vince said, with a rule that measures things that pull in. He knew you would be made to pull in. He knew you would be made to live small. He wanted you to have a rule that would still tell you the truth. He turned the folding rule over once in his hand and laid it back beside the other. There used to be a foundry in this valley every 2 miles, he said. 12,000 men in the local. They had to count them by neighborhood. We had 13 pattern makers at sheet and tube alone in 1968. By 87-3. Now your grandfather and Hovan and me and a couple of fellas down in Sharon, and Hovan's son who is good but won't stay. He looked at her across the bench. Computers must toast of it now, he said. They cut foam from a drawing. Foam burns out. The pour fills the space. Nobody has to know the wood. Nobody has to know which way the grain wants to go around a curve. The work is faster. The work is not the same. Your grandfather knew the work was not the same and he kept doing the old work anyway. That is who he was. Vince did not say more about it. He put the rule back in the drawer and closed the drawer with the side of his hand and went out to where Adele waited on the path. Hattie did not pick up the rule again for the rest of that day. She sat at the bench in Silas's old chambray shirt, and the smell of him was still in the cloth. That night, after Adele's lights had gone out across the yard, Hattie went back into the workshop alone with the kerosene lamp from the kitchen. She did not know why she went back. She thought maybe to put away the things Vince had taken down. She found instead the leather notebook. The notebook was in the second drawer of the small standing desk by the door. The leather was the brown of a saddle that had been on a horse. The pages were unruled. The first date was September of 1977. She sat down on the workbench stool and opened the book to the first page. September 19, 1977, 7:30 in the morning, the valley shut. I walked home with my lunchbox and didn't know what to do with my hands. She turned the page. October 4, 1977, 5 days since, Lila brought me a casserole. I do not know what is next. She turned again. December 12, 1977. Hired on at Hovan's foundry for less than half. I will take it. The pages were not many. Silas did not write often. He wrote on days that had mattered, and then there was a gap of months or sometimes years before he wrote again. She turned through 12 pages, and there in the 13th was a line that stopped her. March 14, 1978. Lila brought the baby. Hattie May. I made her a rule today. She is 7 pounds 4 ounces. She has fingernails I can see through. Hattie set the notebook on her knee. July 6, 1980. The girl can walk. She came across the yard to the workshop door and pointed. September 2, 1983. The girl is at school. Lila says she reads the cereal box. October of 1985. Lila is sick. She has not told the husband, she has told me. I do not know what to do with my hands. Hattie did not read the next entry yet. She put her thumb on the page and looked at the kerosene lamp and at the wall of tools and at the small lit space the lamp made in the wider dark of the workshop. There were 40 years of pages. There were 18 years of Hattie May Cromer in them. She had not known she had been counted. She turned the page. November of 1986. The funeral. Hattie May rode in the wrong car. The husband would not let me hold her. I held my hat. December of 1986. The husband has remarried. The new wife will not pass me my letters. April of 1987. The new wife sent back the rabbit. June of 1990. She is 12. Mrs. Tessler from the church drove down and brought me a picture school photo. 2 front teeth back in. I am going to put it on the shelf. March of 1992. Mrs. Tessler says she has gotten tall. She is in her mother's coat. I cannot tell from the picture whether her shoes still fit. Hattie stopped at that line for a long time. She read it again. He had been counting her shoes. The line was the line of a man who could not be in the room with a growing child. So he was in the rooms a growing child grew through with what he could keep of them. She turned the page. October of 1993. The doctor says my hands are not coming back this time. I am not afraid of dying. I am afraid I did not finish the room. Hattie shut the book. She did not cry. She put the lamp on the bench and stood up and walked the length of the wall once, end to end, with her hand out and her fingers passing over the handles of the tools. She stopped halfway down the wall. She did not know yet what had stopped her. Her elbow had brushed one of the hooks under a plane. The hook had moved. She stepped back. A hook should not move. A hook is a piece of bent wire driven through a board. She put her hand on the hook and turned it. The hook turned a quarter and stopped. It turned the other way and stopped. She let go of it and looked along the wall. She tested the hook on the next plane. It did not move. She tested the hook on a small block plane 4 feet down. The hook moved. She tested 2 more. 1 moved. 3 did not. She stood back from the wall. There is a thing the body learns before the mind does. I have stood in this room 3 weeks of mornings, and my mind had not seen this wall, and my hand had. The hand brushed the hook 3 times before tonight, and on the 3rd time it did not let go. She did not understand why the thought came in her own voice. It came that way. She let it. She stood for a long minute and looked at the wall again. She tried to see it the way Silas had seen it on the morning he had laid it out. The tools were grouped not by kind but by size. The hooks that moved were spaced along the wall in a pattern she had taken 3 weeks to feel. She counted them. 4 hooks moved. There were 140 hooks on this wall. 4 out of 140. She set the kerosene lamp on the bench. She went back to the first hook. She had marked it in her mind by the tool above it, a small dovetail saw with a brass back. She put her hand on the hook and looked at the other 3. A gauge, a pair of inside calipers, a shrink rule 12 inches, the smallest of Silas's rules, a jack plane. 4 hooks, 4 kinds of tool. She thought of the order Silas had taught her to use them in to make a single joint by hand. He had told her one Saturday afternoon when she was 9. He had let her sit on a workshop bench in another house and watch him work. Mark first, measure, pair, plane. Gauge, calipers, rule plane. She turned the first hook. She turned the second. She turned the third. She turned the fourth. She heard a click that did not come from the hooks. She heard it from inside the wall. She put both hands flat against the boards and pushed. The boards did not move. She put her shoulder against them where she had pushed. A section of the wall, 3 feet wide and 7 feet tall, pivoted on a hinge she could not see, and a draft of slightly warmer air came out from behind it. The room was no larger than a closet and twice as deep. 8 feet by 6, concrete floor. Plaster walls painted a pale gray. Silas must have mixed himself, because the pigment had not gone even across the boards. A small wooden desk against the far wall, with a chair pushed under it. A glass kerosene lamp like the one she had brought, but trimmed and waiting, the wick still clean. A pegboard above the desk. On the pegboard 18 envelopes, hung by the corner with brass pushpins. Each envelope had her name on it, written in his pencil, in the same hand that had written the diary in the workshop. Each envelope had a year on it. The years went from 1979 to 1996. The last 3 envelopes did not have a postmark. The 15 before them did. Stamped, dated, addressed in Silas's hand to the Adams Street house in Akron, returned. The red ink cross each one read return to sender. The ink had faded on the older envelopes and was sharp on the newer. The last 3 were sealed but had never been mailed. She did not know what to do with her body. She set the kerosene lamp from the workshop on the desk. Above the pegboard, on the only wall not covered by it, was a long shelf. On the shelf were photographs, not in frames, loose, held in place by small flat stones the size of $half, river-smooth, gathered from somewhere she could not place. 15 photographs in order. A baby, a toddler in a green dress, a girl on a tricycle, a girl missing a tooth, a girl on a porch she did not recognize, eating a popsicle, a girl in a Sunday dress at her mother's grave, a girl at 12 in a school photograph, a girl at 14 with a dog she had never met, a girl at 15 leaning against the door of Silas's pickup, a girl at 16 in a sweater, the same sweater she was wearing tonight under the chambray shirt. At the end of the shelf, set apart, a small wooden model of a one-story house. Hattie did not know at first what she was looking at. Then she did. It was the house she was standing under. Every window in the right place, the porch the right width. A second smaller building behind, the workshop, with the door painted the same silvered brown. The model was the size of a loaf of bread. The work on it was fine enough that she could see, on the model porch, the same yellow polyester curtain in the front window. It was not her father's house in Akron. It was this house. She turned slowly. On the wall behind her, set into the plaster, a small wooden box the size of a Bible. Cedar, joined fine, with no visible nails. The lid was bordered in a thin line of inlay, a single strip of darker wood. Walnut, maybe. It had been set in with the patience of a man who had run out of things to do but not out of love. She sat down in the chair. The cat had followed her through the door. The cat sat down on her left foot. She reached for the box. She did not open the box yet. She held it in her lap with both hands and felt the weight of it, which was less than the weight of a Bible and more than the weight of a book of poems. The wood was warm. The joints were dovetail. She knew now what a dovetail was. She knew now what cedar smelled like when it had been worked by a hand that loved it. She had learned both of these things in the workshop on the other side of the wall this week. She did not open the box yet because she understood, in the way the body understands before the mind does, that the contents would change the shape of the room she had to live in. She did not yet know whether the shape would be one she could fit inside. The cat shifted on her foot. She turned the box in her hands. The lid was not hinged, it slid. She set her thumb on the edge of the lid. She slid it. She looked. The box opened from her thumb almost without resistance. The cedar smell came up out of it stronger now. It mixed with a paper smell she had not smelled before. It was the smell of letters that had been kept dry for a long time in a place built to keep them dry. Inside the box, 3 things. A bundle of 18 envelopes, wrapped in a length of brown twine of the same kind Adele had tied around the workshop key. A folded blue paper with the seal of the United Steelworkers, Local 1330, Youngstown, Ohio, in the upper left corner. A single sealed envelope on top of all of it. The sealed envelope had no year on it, no postmark, only her name in Silas's hand. The hand on this envelope was different from the hand on the other letters. Not careful. Tired. She did not pick up the bundle yet. She did not pick up the blue paper yet. She picked up the envelope on top. She turned it over. The seal had been done twice, once with the glue and then again with a small dab of white candle wax pressed flat with the side of his thumb. The thumbprint was still in it. The wax was pale yellow. The flap had been written across in pencil 2 words. Read first. She broke the seal. Inside, 3 folded pages of yellow legal paper. They were written front and back in Silas's hand. The hand on these pages was even more tired than the hand on the envelope. On the 3rd page, the words began to lean and lift off the line. She set the pages on her knee. She read. Hattie May, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am not anymore. You are 18 or near it. The worst thing has happened that I prepared for. I am sorry it has happened. I am not sorry you are here. On a Monday in September of 1977, the gates of Youngstown sheet and tube closed. I walked out for the last time with my lunchbox in my hand. I was 41 years old. I had 3 patterns half finished on my bench. I left them there because I did not know what else to do with my hands. 5,000 men walked out with me that morning. A man walks out alone. The valley shut. We learned what it meant slowly. Your mother came home from college and stayed. She brought you home in March of '78. You weighed 7 pounds 4 ounces. I made you the rule that week. I made it from boxwood I had been saving for a pattern I was no longer going to make. I made it shrink because the work I knew was shrink work. And because I knew, the way a man knows the weather is turning, that you would be made to live small. You were. I am sorry. I could not stop it. When your mother was sick, she asked me not to take you. She said the husband had to learn how to keep you himself. She said if I took you, there would be nothing of her left in him. She was wrong about him. She was right about how she wanted to be remembered. I have tried to honor both. I built this room in 1980 from boards I cut out of the old pattern shop at Sheet and Tube before they tore it down. The hinge is from a casting that did not pour clean. I kept it 20 years because I knew I would need a hinge that would never break. I built it for you. For a long time, I did not know whether you would ever stand in it. I built it anyway. Inside the cedar box are 18 envelopes, birthday cards. 15 were sent and came back. 3 I did not get to send. On the blue paper is the number of a savings account at the Steelworkers Federal Credit Union, in your name. I opened it the week you were born. I put what I could into it every month until last March. The last deposit cleared. Whatever is in there is yours. Use it for what you need. I would like you to use some of it to learn the work, but only if the work wants you. On the back of the blue paper, 7 names. The 7 pattern makers left in the valley who knew me and would teach you. Vincent Hudak you have met. The other 6 know you are coming. You do not have to do any of this. The house is yours either way. The workshop is yours either way. The rule is yours either way. There is a thing I should have told your mother before she got sick, about the day the valley shut and what I cannot write it now. My hand is tired. The truth is the kind of truth a man tells only on a Saturday morning to one person. If you ever want to know it, ask Adele. She knows. She has waited for you to ask. Mingo isn't much, but it's yours, the way you were always mine, even when no one told you. Your grandfather, Silas Cromer. She read it twice. She did not cry on the first reading. She cried on the second. She cried at the line about the casting that had not poured clean. She cried at the line about the rule being hers either way. She set the pages on the desk. Outside, the kerosene lamp had burned down a half-inch. The cat was asleep on her foot. The room around her was no longer a small room. It was 18 years of a man's attention shaped into something the size of a closet. She did not yet have the language for what that was. She would not have it for some time. She picked up the bundle of 18 envelopes. She untied the twine. She held the bundle in her lap. She did not open them yet. She read the years on the corners instead. 1979 when she was 1, 1980 when she was 2. She read down the bundle to 1996, the year she was 18. She picked up the 79 envelope and opened it. The card inside was the kind a man buys at a drugstore and writes a single line on. The line on this one read, "She walked yesterday. She from the chair to the window. I have watched 100 castings cool, and I have never watched anything as good as that." She did not read all of them that night. She read the one for the year she was 6, the year she had broken her arm falling off a fence she did not remember climbing. The line in it, they told me, "You broke your arm," and I went down to the church to light a candle. I lit it for the arm. I lit it for me, for not being there. She read the one for the year she was 13, the year her stepmother had cut her hair short against her will. The line, "Mrs. Tesler sent me the picture. Your hair will grow." She read the one for the year she was 16, the year she had won a high school art prize for a charcoal drawing of a tree. The line, "I do not know what a charcoal is, but I know what a tree is. Yours is the kind a man wants to sit under." She put the bundle back on the desk. She picked up the blue paper. She unfolded it. She read the account number. She read the deposit history at the bottom of the page. It was the small print of a credit union that printed its statements on old paper because no one had told them not to. 180 deposits in 15 years. Some were $30. Some were more in months when there had been work or a refund or a small estate. The balance, with the credit union interest, stood at $52,400.43. She turned the page over. 7 names in his pencil: Vincent Hudak, Andrei Kwalik, James Bell, Henry Vogts, Stefan Romoser, Tomas Wisniewski. Walter Hovan June phone numbers beside the names. 2 of them had been crossed out with a small note in the margin, "Gone." She set the paper on the desk beside the letter. She sat in the chair for a long time. She understood 3 things in the order she understood them. The order mattered to her later, when she tried to tell Adele about it in plain words and could not. First, she understood that she had been seen. 18 years of being walked through her own house like a curtain rod. Nobody noticed had ended in the discovery that one man had watched her every step. The watching had not done her any good while it happened. The watching had done its work tonight. Second, she understood that the watching had not been only love. It had been preparation. The room had been built and stocked and locked and kept the way a man stocks a cellar for a storm he is sure will come. The storm had been her father. The storm had been her stepmother. The storm had been the day she was on the porch on Adam Street with $28 in her pocket. Silas had not stopped the storm. He had built a roof for after. Third, she understood that this had cost him. A man does this thing. He puts what he can into an account for the granddaughter the stepmother sends letters back from. For 18 years. After losing the work that taught him what a dollar was worth. He is a man who has spent his life on someone he could not be in the room with. He had not married again. He had not had other children. He had built a room 6 feet wide. She picked the letter up and read it once more. She read the unfinished line again. She did not yet ask Adele she would. Not tonight. She blew out the kerosene lamp. She stepped out through the pivoting wall and pushed it back into place. The 4 hooks clicked into their seats. The wall was a wall again. She stood in the workshop with the cat at her ankle, and the workshop did not look the same. She walked out the door. The yard was cold. The October moon was past full, low over the line of ash trees at the back of the property. She walked to the apple tree. She had not looked at the trunk yet. She looked at it now. On the south side, at the height of an arm, the bark had been notched. Small, clean carvings, the work of a knife, made 1 to a year. She counted them. 15. She put her hand on the trunk. She ran her thumb over the lowest carving, the smallest the year she was 1. She ran it up. 2, 3, 4. Up the trunk in the dark. The last carving was at shoulder. Above the last carving, the bark was unmarked. Silas had stopped at 15. He had stopped because that had been the spring before he died. There would have been one more carving in 1993, in March, before he was buried in October. The tree had gone on without him. The bark above where he had stopped had grown 3 more years smooth. She did not have a knife. She went back into the workshop and took the small bench knife from its hook on the wall. The handle was olive wood. The handle was warm in her hand because the workshop had begun to be warm. She came back to the apple tree. She set the point of the knife against the bark, an inch above where he had stopped. She made the cut, slow, steady. The carving she made was not the same as his carvings. She did not try to make it the same. She made it her own. The 16th notch. She stood under the tree for a while afterward and listened to the cold. She did not call her father. Adele called him. Adele called him a week after the night of the box. She did it without telling Hattie. She did it because she was old enough to know the work that has to be done by the older when the younger cannot. She told the father, in her short, hard, plain way, that his daughter was at S. Cromer's house on Decatur Road in Mingo, that she was safe, that she had been left a property and a savings account and a vocation, that he should not call unless he had something to say that he could not say through a check. The father called the next morning. Adele watched Hattie pick up the phone on the wall of the workshop. She did not stay to listen. Hattie said hello. The father said her name. He said it once. Then he said, "Are you all right?" She held the receiver in both hands and looked through the open door of the workshop at the wall of tools. She said, "Yes, sir." He waited. She waited. After a while he said, "Your stepmother sends her regards." He did not say anything else. The line was a long silence. After about half a minute, the father hung up. A week later, a small envelope came in the mail. No letter inside. Only a check for $200 drawn on the Akron Savings and Loan in his hand. The memo line read, "For groceries." Hattie did not cash it. She put it under a paperweight on the workbench. It stayed there for the rest of the autumn and into the winter. In February, a rain came through the seam in the tin roof Adele had mentioned the autumn before. The water ran along the bench and over the check. The ink ran on the check. The number on it became unreadable. Hattie threw it out. Adele saw her do it through the kitchen window the next morning, and Adele did not say anything about it then or later. In December, when the snow had buried the workshop path twice, Hattie asked Adele the question. She asked it across the kitchen table at Adele's house, with a bowl of pierogi between them. She said, the letter ended in the middle of a thing. "He said you would know." Adele set her fork down. "I know some," she said, "not all. He told me in 1991, the year my Tadek died. He could not tell your mother. He could not tell himself most days. He told me because I am Polish, and the Polish can hold a truth without it spoiling." Hattie waited. On a Friday in September of '77, Adele said, 2 days before the gates closed, Silas knew something he was not supposed to know. He was a steward. There were rooms he had to be in. He was in one on that Friday afternoon. He did not tell what he heard. He was told not to. Whatever he did or did not do with what he heard, he carried it. He carried it for 50 weeks of every year. On the 51st, he came over to this kitchen and sat where you are sitting. He said it again. I never asked him to say more than he could. Hattie said, what was it he heard? Adele said, child, that part stays with him. He chose not to say. I will not say for him. There is a difference between holding a man's secret and holding a man's silence. He gave me one and not the other. Hattie looked at the table. She said, that is heavier than building a room. Adele, yes, child, it is heavier than building a room. He did both. That night, Hattie made a list at the small wooden desk in the room behind the wall. 6 names. She copied them from the back of the blue paper onto a fresh sheet in her own pencil, in a hand that was small and careful and not unlike his. She put the list in the inside pocket of the chambray shirt that had been Silas's. She slept in the bedroom for the first time. The quilt was a 9-patch. The bed was made the way it had been made when she had first opened the door. She lifted the corner. She got in. The mattress had the cold of a bed that has not been slept in. The quilt held the cold for half an hour. Then it did not. She fell asleep with her hand on the folding rule on the nightstand. The first hard frost of the next year came on the 8th of September, 3 weeks before the almanac promised. The tobacco in the small fields east of Mingo that had not been cut yet was a loss nobody talked about. Hattie May Cromer had been in the house on Decatur Road 11 months. She was 19. She had cut her hair in March before the birthday to the length she had worn at 12 when her stepmother had not yet taken the scissors to it. She had been wearing the chambray work shirt of Silas's for 11 months. The cloth had begun to give at the elbows. Adele had taught her, in March, how to put on a patch from the inside in the Polish way her own husband had wanted his sleeves done. The kitchen table was no longer set for 2. It was set for whichever of them was eating that day. The plates Silas had laid out 3 years before were still in the cabinet, washed and put away in March on the morning of Hattie's 19th birthday by Hattie herself. She had not been able to do it in November. She had not been able to do it in December or January. She had done it in March because by then she had been there long enough to understand what a man sets up a table for and to set one of her own. The 2 extra place settings she kept in the cabinet. She did not throw them out. The workshop had changed shape too. The plywood was off the high window. The light through it now landed on the bench in a wide pale band. The band moved across the boards through the day, from the east end at 7 in the morning to the west end at 4 in the afternoon. The wall of tools was the same wall. Every tool was the same tool. The masking tape labels had not been changed because she had not wanted to change them. She knew the names now without reading them. Behind the wall, the room had stayed the room. She had not changed the photographs on the shelf or the 18 envelopes on the pegboard. She had taken down the loose photographs once in February to copy the dates onto the backs in her own pencil. She had put them back exactly where they had been. She had added 1 new photograph. It was a Polaroid Adele had taken of her at the bench, in the chambray shirt, holding a half-finished pattern of a small valve. The pattern was for Hovan's foundry. It was her first paid work. She had been learning for 11 months. She had started with Vince. Vince had given her a piece of clear pine in November and a set of dividers and a sharp pencil and a tri-square. He had told her to draw a square on the wood. She had drawn it. He had told her to draw it again. She had drawn it again. By the 7th try, the lines met cleanly at the corners. He had nodded once. After Vince, she had gone in February to Stefan Romaser. Stefan was the eldest of the 6. He was 81. He lived above his daughter's garage in Campbell. He could no longer hold a chisel for more than 10 minutes at a stretch. He could still see what was wrong with a cut at 20 paces. He had told her, sitting in his daughter's kitchen with a cup of cold coffee in front of him, that the work was about the grain. The grain was the language the wood spoke. A pattern maker who fought the grain made a part the iron would crack at the cooling. A pattern maker who listened to the grain made a part the iron would love. She had nodded and not understood. By April she had understood. By May she could cut a draft angle on a pattern by hand, the small 1-degree taper on the vertical faces that lets the sand release the pattern when the mold is parted. She made one mistake at first. She made it so the angle leaned the wrong way. Vince had let her cut 3 more patterns before she noticed it herself. When she noticed it, she put the chisel down. She walked across the yard to Adele's house and stood in the kitchen and cried for 10 minutes. Adele made her tea. Adele said no. The next day she cut silk draftingles, all of them leaned the right way. In June she had made her first real pattern. It was a valve body for the Hovan foundry. Walter Hovan Jr. had given her the engineer's drawing on a Tuesday. He had told her she had 2 weeks. She had taken 9 days. She had cut the wood by hand because the bandsaw made her nervous. She had used the shrink rule on every measurement. She had drafted the angle 1 degree the right way. She had finished it on the night of the 8th day and set it on the bench under a clean sheet and not looked at it again until the morning. In the morning she had carried it to the foundry in East Liverpool, wrapped in a towel. Walter had unwrapped it on his workbench in front of 2 men she did not know. He had turned it twice in his hand. He had set it down. He had said, "Your grandfather did the cope handles for the 4-inch globe valve we ran in '86. He did them the way you have done these." He had turned around and walked out to the floor. The 2 men had not looked at her. After about a minute, one of them had said, "You'll do." The pattern had cast clean. She had been paid $48. She did not take an apprentice. She did not put a sign at the foot of the driveway. She did not run a flyer at the post office. She did not invite a class of high school students for a tour of the workshop. She did not give a talk anywhere. What she did was send 6 letters. In November, she had written the 6 men whose names had not yet been crossed out on the back of the blue paper. She had written them in pencil, in her own hand modeled on his. She had asked each one if he would teach her. She had not asked for a long apprenticeship. She asked for 1 Saturday a month. 5 men had said yes. The 6th had been Henry Vokes. Hank had not answered. In February, she had heard through Adele that Hank had died on Christmas Eve alone in his apartment above his sister's barber shop in Newcastle. He had been 78. He had been the only one of the 7 she had never met. She had gone in March to Castle Heights Cemetery with Adele. Adele had brought a small spray of dried thyme because she had said she did not know what else to bring. They had stood at the grave for about 10 minutes. Adele had said in Polish a sentence Hattie did not understand. Hattie had not asked her to translate. She did not put a plaque at the house. She did not make a fund. She did not stand at a microphone or write a letter to the newspaper about Silas's life. She had sent 6 letters. She had gone to 1 funeral. She had learned the work. The work was paying her forward without anyone having to be there. She kept the rest of the account. She used some of it. In December, she paid Adele's property taxes for the year without telling Adele. The assessor's office sent a receipt in April, and Adele found out and came across the yard with the receipt in her hand. Her face was set in a way Hattie had not seen on it before. She said, "You do not do that." Hattie said, "I do this." Adele said, "All right then." Adele did not let her pay them again. In June, Hattie used some more of the account to buy a small chest of measuring tools at an estate sale in East Liverpool. The tools had belonged to a pattern maker out of the Bethlehem foundry who had died the year before. The widow had not known what they were worth. Hattie paid her $200 more than the asking. The widow had cried in the driveway. Hattie had not stayed. The chest sat on the second shelf above the bench. She had not yet looked through all of it. Slowly. Her father called once more in May. She did not answer. Adele saw the missed call light on the workshop phone and asked her about it the next morning gently without asking. Hattie said, "My father called yesterday." Adele said, "Are you going to call him back?" Hattie said no. Adele said, "All right." Adele did not ask her why. Adele had never asked her why about any of this. It was the great gift Adele had given her in the year she was 18. The gift of not asking. The phone did not ring again. In late June, on the anniversary of Adele's husband's death, Hattie had gone with her to the small Polish cemetery in Lowellville. Tadek Krasinski had died in 1988 at the age of 58. He had been a pattern maker at the same foundry as Silas. He had built and lost as much of himself in the shutdown as Silas had built and lost. Adele had been his second wife. There were no children. The grave was a simple stone with a small steel pattern of a screw thread set into the face of it, made by Silas the year after Tadek died. Adele put fresh thyme on the grave. She said in Polish a thing Hattie did not understand. Hattie did not ask her to translate that one either. There were 2 sentences Adele had said in Polish in the time Hattie had known her, both at graves. Hattie had decided early she would not ask. The sentences were Adele's. The graves were Adele's. Hattie was the company. She held Adele's hand on the way back to the car. In August, 2 weeks before the early frost, Hattie had gone with Adele to her mother's grave. Lila Cromer Pruitt was buried in St. Sebastian's Polish Cemetery in Struthers, the same row as Silas. The husband had not been told. The husband had buried her in a plot he had picked in Akron, and Silas had paid in 1993, 2 months before he himself died, to have her moved. The husband had not noticed. The Akron plot had had a stone over it that simply said, "His wife." Hattie had visited it once, at her stepmother's insistence when she was 12. She had not known what was under it, because what was under it was not her mother. Silas had moved Lila quietly. He had put a stone of his own choosing. The Struthers stone read, Lila Cromer Pruitt, 1944 to 1987. She came home. Hattie stood in front of the stone for a while. Adele stayed a few paces back. She picked up the small valve pattern from where she had set it the morning before. She laid it on the bench in the light through the high window. She picked up the folding rule with the brass hinges. She opened it to 12 inches. She measured. The valve pattern was 4 3/4 across the wide face and 3 7/8 across the narrow. She wrote the dimensions on a slip of paper. She wrote them in the shrunken dimensions of the shrink rule, the dimensions the iron would pull in from. She circled the number that mattered. She set the rule on the bench beside the pattern. She closed the folding rule. She put it in her own small toolbox, the one she had bought in March at the hardware store in East Liverpool with $12 of her own money. The box held the small bench knife and a set of dividers and a brand new tri-square she had not yet used because the old one had not yet failed her. She set the boxes on the second shelf above the bench. The box was unmarked. She would not paint a name on it. The cat came in through the open door. The cat was 16 and a half, and his back legs had begun to drag. Adele had named him Plum 41 years ago for the small lead weight the pattern makers used to find a true vertical. The name had outlasted his back legs. He sat on her foot. Outside, in the apple tree, the bark above the 16th carving was still smooth. She had not made the 17th yet. She was not in a hurry to count herself. She would carve again in March, on her 20th birthday. After that, again in the March after, until the tree ran out of bark at the height of an arm and she would have to carve higher. She picked up a chisel. She set it on the wood. She listened to the grain. The grain told her something she had not been able to hear a year ago. It told her where the pattern wanted to be cut. It told her where the wood would give and where it would not. She had not made up the grain. The grain had been in the wood when the tree was alive. The grain stayed in the wood when the tree was no longer alive. The work was learning to hear what was already there. She made the cut. The cut was clean. She moved the chisel along the line. She made the next cut. The first cut had taught the wood whose hand it had to listen to now. The second cut was easier. The way the second word a child says is always easier than the first. The light moved across the bench from east to west. The cat shifted on her foot. Some men measure their love in inches and leave the rule behind.